All right, this is chapter 4, lesson 4, add and subtract unlike fractions. So last time we talked about subtracting like fractions, and all we had to do was add or subtract the numerators, and we left the denominators alone. Here, with unlike fractions, we have two denominators that are not the same, or two or more denominators that are not the same. So we need to change those denominators in order to be able to add or subtract the numbers. So before you can add two blank blank, or fractions with different denominators, in that blank you're going to write unlike fractions. Before you can add two unlike fractions or fractions with different denominators, rename one or both of the fractions so that you have a common denominator. All right, when we're adding or subtracting unlike fractions, to add or subtract fractions with different denominators, I rename the fractions using the blank, blank, blank. In that blank, you're going to write least common denominator. So rename the fractions using the least common denominator, or LCD. Add or subtract as with blank fractions. In that blank, you're going to write like fractions. If necessary, blank the sum or difference. In that blank, you're going to write simplify. So you add or subtract fractions, you rename them using the LCD. You add or subtract as with like fractions, and if necessary, you simplify the answer. Okay. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. The first example I have says find 1/2 plus 1/4. So first I could use a number line. Okay. Now I notice, okay, so 1/2 and 1/4, they're unlike fractions, so they don't have the same denominator. So I'm going to use a number line. So I start at 0, I go to 1/2, and then I add a fourth, so it gets me 3/4. The second method is using the LCD. I highly recommend using the LCD method and not necessarily the number line method, because the number line you have to draw, then you have to segment everything out, and still make sure that you have everything correct. So the LCD is actually probably going to be a quicker method for you to use. It's not to say that method 1 is wrong. Method 2 will just probably be easier. So the least common denominator of 2 and 4, or a common denominator of 2 and 4, is 4, because 2 times 2 gives me 4. 4 times 1 is still 4. Okay. Now, remember with an LCD, the number has to be at least as big as the larger denominator. So that you can't use an LCD of 2, for example, in this case. It has to be at least 4. It can be bigger than 4, but it has to be at least 4, okay, in this example. So 1/2 and 1/4 is 4. 1/2 plus 1/4. I multiply 2 times 2, and whatever I do to the denominator, I also have to do to the numerator. So 1 times 2 gives me 2, and 2 times 4 gives me 4. 2/4, you can notice, is an equivalent fraction to 1/2. Okay? If I simplified 2/4, I would get 1/2. That's the idea. You're creating an equivalent fraction that has the same denominator as the other fraction. So I don't have to do anything with 1/4 because it already has 4 as a denominator. And I add like I would adding and subtracting like fractions. 2 plus 1 gives me 3. My denominator stays the same. Okay? Using either method, I get 3/4. All right, let's take a look at example number 2. -2/3 minus 1/2. So if I use a number line, I started at 0. I subtracted 2/3, which is -4/6, and then I subtracted another 1/2. Again, this is where it gets kind of tricky, okay? So it's a lot easier a lot of times to use the LCD. So for -2/3 and -1/2, my common denominator is 6. My LCD is 6. So 3 times 2 gives me 6. 2 times 2 gives me 4. 2 times 3 gives me 6, and 1 times 3 gives me 3, okay? So then I have -4/6 minus 3/6. -4 minus 3 gives me -7. My denominator stays the same. So I have -7/6, and that gives me -1 and 1/6 when I simplify it to a mixed number. Alright, there are a couple of try problems out below. I want you to go ahead, pause the video, try them out, and when you're done, we'll go over the answers together. Alright, now that you've had a chance to try out the try problems, let's go over the answers together. So, the first question I have is add 1/6 plus 2/3 and write in simplest form. So, as I can see, 1/6 and 2/3 are unlike fractions. So the first thing I need to do is find the LCD. So the least common denominator between 3 and 6. I can do this by thinking about the multiples. My multiples of 3 are 3, 6, and I can stop there because 6 is right there. Okay? So that means 6 is going to be my common denominator. Okay, so now 1/6 I don't have to change, but 2/3 I do. 2/3, and I want to change it so it's over 6. 3 times 2 gives me 6. So 2 times 2 gives me 4. So now I can add 1/6 plus 4/6. When I do this, they're not like fractions, so I add the numerators. 1 plus 4 gives me 5, so 5/6. And I cannot simplify that because 5/6 is in simplest form. The other one I have is subtract 5/8 minus 1/4, right in simplest form. So again, I'm going to write my multiples for the smaller number first. So my multiples of 4 are 4, 8, and I could stop there because I already have 8. So I need to change 1/4. 4 times what gives me 8? Well, 4 times 2 gives me 8, so 1 times 2 gives me 2. So I have 5/8 minus 2/8. When I subtract, 5 minus 2 gives me 3. My denominator stays the same, and I cannot simplify this any further because it is already in simplest form. And that is the end of Chapter 4, Lesson 4.